So welcome to an unscripted talk on the ego and the spiritual path and the journey of spiritual growth. I say unscripted because in person, when I've done talks before, I've always planned meticulously. I've always had slides and I've always, wanted to prepare as best I can. And I find whilst there's a benefit to that and it is good at a certain point, it also causes me to become really caught up in my intellect and to kind of see it as more of a lecture, almost like something that I have as a backup. So I'm kind of challenging myself today to surrender to the process and to talk through this. So what I would like to cover is really creating clarity around the role of the ego, creating clarity around what the ego is, right? We kind of have a lot of misconceptions. We have a lot of different messages about the role of the ego. On some level, some of us believe it's something to be destroyed or something to be gotten rid of, like it's something that's not good for us. On another level, we feel like it's something that we can just rid ourselves of. And then there's a fear that, well, if we have no ego, do I have an identity? Do I know who I am? What is the point of reference? At this current moment in time, sorry, just check there. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. So at this moment in time, we're living at a stage where in the collective, there's a lot of information that's surfacing, particularly around Jungian psychology, for example. And there's a lot of what I would call, I know Eckhart Tolle is one of the most well-known teachers who maybe reduces the ego, maybe kind of oversimplifies the role of the ego. So what happens then, when we try and understand the ego with language, when we try and understand it from a certain point of view, we end up having a mixed idea, and we feel like when I'm acting a certain way, that is ego. Now, that is true. That is true. The trouble is when we look at all of the ego and we kind of put it all in the same box, we strip away a lot of its value. So in Jungian psychology, the ego is consciousness. In Jungian psychology, the ego actually has a role. The ego has a role to surrender and to facilitate individuation. And that individuation is very much a spiritual practice in itself. It's a religious function. It's a return to wholeness. And that's very much a spiritual practice, right? So from a Jungian perspective, the ego is something we want to use skillfully. When we just look at the ego as almost like a weight that we carry, like something that we don't want, we unconsciously create resistance towards it. So when we think that, I don't want to act from ego, we're actually creating a kind of shadow element that creates resistance towards the ego. If we can understand that the ego is actually a tool to use and not to be used by and not to be run by, then we kind of transform our relationship with it. We can accept it. We can actually integrate it as well. We can kind of look at our shadow elements, bring that to light as we continue to grow and continue to expand. So really, we need like a clear understanding of the role of the ego, and also looking at kind of what is more expansive. Like when I actually look at myself and when I think of my identity and I think of who I am, what comes to mind? Now, we might look at ego as just identity. Ego is just this conceptual self-image that I have about what I am. I am Ricky. I am a writer, etc., etc. It's conceptual. It's based in language. It's something that we can describe, right? We can write a list of all the things that we might be. Obviously, it's not as straightforward as that. In reality, there's a lot of unconscious processes that we're not actually aware of that create this image. So a lot of the time when we say we're acting egoically, we're reacting to an unconscious belief or thought. So what we want to look at is what actually creates, like what components of mind are there? What do we want to rid ourselves of with love and compassion, right? Not from a place of destruction, because that creates a lot of inner chaos. But what do we almost want to love into a process of alchemy? What do we want to transform through compassion? And that's almost the process of the ego and spiritual growth. It's a process of learning to accept, love, and transmute these qualities. But then we also want to look at, well, is the ego just thought, right? Because this is something that, you know, you can kind of, from certain non-dual practices, you can look at all thought as being ego. And it's true that all thought is not your true essence, right? It's just contents of mind. And our truest essence is the awareness behind that. It's the container of the contents, not the contents itself. But that doesn't mean that there aren't thoughts that are valid. That doesn't mean that there aren't thoughts that we need to function. So, you know, what happens is we tend to then kind of find ourselves in a position where you get questions like, okay, I want to live in the now and I want to work with my ego, but I also kind of have dreams, like things that I want to do in my life. Is that a conflict? Right? Now, when you think of the process, and I'm not sure how familiar you are individually with like the process of individuation. This is a huge process of transformation, of bringing so much from the unconscious part of mind, which is also connected to the heart, it's connected to the spirit, it's connected to the body, but it's a huge process of transformation and expression. What comes to mind when I think of this is that everything in the manifest, everything in the material world, right, is encoded with information. From an acorn that grows into a tree, from the spark that ignited to cause a big bang and then expand into the universe and the cosmos as we know it today, information is encoded, right? Like we have DNA that is encoded with information that creates our physical form and so on and so forth. The reason that I talk to this is because we have this kind of paradox between stepping back from, right, spiritual growth, connecting to our true essence, connecting to awareness, whilst at the same time flourishing and bringing forward an expression of individuality. Now, a lot of people will mistake individuality for ego and say that, oh, I shouldn't be expressing myself in this way or that way, because you might have an idea around what is an authentic expression. So the trickiness and the real challenge with this process is to understand and kind of tune into a different intelligence that lets us know, when am I causing my own suffering? When am I acting from ego? And what can I do about it? What do I have to hold on to? What thoughts are skillful? What thoughts are unconscious? What is running my life behind the scenes? What is causing me to react? And this is a process of transformation and spiritual growth. And I would love to say that it's as easy as sitting in meditation and just kind of connecting to the formless part of the self and kind of thinking, oh yeah, I can feel this. I can tap into it. But in reality, we all live in the modern world, right? We all live in a time where we have to engage with people. We live in a world where there's just constant news that is really foreboding and sad and heartbreaking on some level. So we have to be able to understand that there is a certain level of engagement with the objective world, and we can actually see the ego. So from your subjective experience, we can see the ego as an objective part of the world. From the base, from the kind of purest expression of your consciousness, the ego is objective. It's made of objects. These objects are all conceptual, right? So every single part of the ego that you can identify as an object isn't your truest essence. Does it mean that that's bad? Does it mean that you want to rid yourself of everything? Well, no, that's not necessarily the case. What we want to learn is how to use the contents from a place of loving detachment, right? And from a place of, how can I engage with the world in the best way? How can I kind of grow and allow myself to express? And when can I detect the contents that I've inherited? And it could be that you've inherited limiting beliefs from your upbringing, from your peers. The amount of messaging that we receive corrupts the mind and mental activity, right? I'm going to pause for a second, just for a second. I want to, I can talk a lot, right? I can talk a lot. I can present a lot. I just want to pause just for a few seconds, just to allow that to digest. If you have any questions, if there's any confusion around what I've shared so far, then let me know. We'll just pause just for a second. Tina's putting a thumb up, so. It feels relevant, and I might, because this is unscripted, I might kind of deviate. I might circle around myself. It might go over the place, but it feels relevant for me right now to talk about corruptibility. And the reason I want to talk about corruptibility is because there's only one part, there's only one function of the psyche. There's only one function within all of us that is corruptible, and that is the mind. The only part of us that is corruptible is the part of us that creates thought, right? This is really important because what that means is all the inauthentic junk that we've inherited only relies and takes place in our mind. Now, it could be unconscious. The ego is generally formed from 90% contents that we've not even chosen ourselves. And this is something that's really important. We believe that we're free, but if we're not doing the work to increase our awareness and to see what is in the unconscious, we're being run by many thoughts that aren't even our own. Now, I don't mean this in a really extreme, like conspiratorial way. I just mean this like our parents, when we grow up, they might just tell us something. They might tell us a story about the world. They might tell us a story about who we are, and we internalize it, right? That's corruptibility straight away. We don't even necessarily realize that we've become corruptible. It could be that we read a story in the news and we create a stereotype about a certain type of person. And then when we meet that type of person, we react in a certain way. We've become corruptible. This information from the external has taken place in the mind, and then our direct reality is affected by it, right? The same is true. The same is true when it comes to identity. We've been told a story about what we are. We believe a story about what we are rather than necessarily the reality. Now, this is really important. We kind of, I know I mentioned this at the beginning. We have kind of two states when we're in a situation where we listen to someone talk, right? Like in this situation right now, you're listening to me talk. The usual go-to is one, to kind of think I'm going to learn something from the outside world that Ricky's talking. Maybe not. I mean, I'm flattered if you feel that way. But one is that we're going to learn something. So I'm here and I'm going to learn. I'm going to attain some kind of information, maybe in a kind of traditional lecture format, right? Another is viewing something as entertainment. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to be entertained by content. My wish through the direction of what I talk is that actually what is happening is that you can connect to your inner kind of discernment, and you can intuitively know what feels true to you, right? What feels right, because we all have a mechanism within that understands truth. And when I talk about corruptibility, this is like the noise, right? It's like the high level thought. It's like, it's noisy. You know, we kind of, if you were to look at the mind as like a group of people, you know, this level of external that has been internalized is like a group of people shouting in a room. Everyone's trying to kind of talk over each other. Everyone's raising their voice. Wisdom and truth is a lot more subtle. So when we think about ego and we want to discern what is ego and in a certain situation, generally as a subjective experience, it's going to be quite loud, right? It's going to be like, oh, I'm right in this situation, or whatever, you know. It's going to be, yeah, I'm great, or I'm no good. It's going to be quite invasive. Whereas truth and the true essence of who we are is a lot more subtle. It's a lot quieter, and it kind of surfaces through the noise. The reason I talk to this is because we can become so corruptible to what we're told. And that doesn't mean like even a theory of what we're capable of and what we're possible, you know, within the human experience, but even corruptible by information that keeps us in a state that keeps us vigilant and alert, so that we are almost kind of unable to really understand who we are, because we're on a state of high alert and we kind of might have a fearful worldview based around that. That's a bit of a tangent. But the point being, the journey of spiritual growth is a journey of truth. The ego is an experience of a story. It's an experience of a false reality that we've created about who we are. If we're ever confused, am I acting from ego? We can ask ourselves, is this something that I can see is based in language? Is it something that I can see is based around a belief, around a story about who I am? Or is it an authentic surfacing? Is it a kind of subtle and very clear and very precise feeling from the heart or from the center of intuition? So we are looking through the path to really look at the inauthentic part of ourselves, and that requires a lot of self-honesty, right? Because it's actually not so easy to confront these parts of ourselves always if we're in a particular ego trap, for example. If we're feeling prideful, I feel like that's relevant for me at the moment. I think pride is a big area for me. I can get really defensive, and like when I'm defensive, and when I become aware that I'm being defensive, letting go of that almost feels like some type of death in a way, right? So to expand on this, right, as I weed through, when we have the conceptual, right? So when we have a false identity based in story, and we identify with that. So we're talking like the story is what we falsely believe is our deepest, truest self, right? We're actually convincing ourselves the story is us. We're convincing ourselves. When we believe that to be the case, a threat to that is going to feel like a threat to your entire existence. Reactivity comes because we almost feel like, oh, in this situation where I feel like I'm right, I'm conscious of this kind of tip of the iceberg. If I let down and I surrender to that part of me has to die. This illusion has to die. So the more I am identifying with this illusionary self, the more I will be afraid to let go and surrender. But it's only in letting go and surrendering that we actually realize we don't sink, we float. And that the ego is such a small part of the psyche. It's such a small part of who we are, right? So the process is to notice, and like obviously this is like an overview. It's repetition over and over again, but the basic process of this journey is to see when we're attached. Is this speed at which I'm talking and what I'm relaying okay? Yeah, I'm hoping like stuff sticks that is relevant. Yeah, perfect. Okay. When we are connected authentically to ourselves, certain thoughts present themselves, right? So one of the big areas of discernment in the path of spiritual growth is to discern between when a thought, and I think I've touched on this before, right? When a thought is skillful and when a thought is unskillful. We're guided subjectively. Now we can go down the route of looking at mind and matter and this interplay between the subjective and the external and how that kind of is symbiotic, but we're guided internally. There can be, I think, when looking at non-dual teachings, and when we really look at the forest true essence of who we are, the non-dual, the kind of cosmic consciousness that is taught in Advaita Vedanta and lots of other ancient traditions, we can kind of forget almost that there's guidance that is leading us to this fruition, leading us to our fullest expression. And that's part of the joy of life, right? This kind of unfolding and engagement with contents. The process becomes more enlivening and more joyful and hopefully more playful and more curious when we engage knowing it's not who we are. But there is guidance that comes from within. And this guidance, this mechanism of guidance that is not egoic, that is not corrupted, that is not formed from trauma, that is not formed from certain experiences that we've had that have stayed in memory. This guides us to our fullest expression, to ourselves. It guides us back to ourselves. We all have some kind of inherent knowing of who we are. And we've been taught and conditioned over a long period of time not to trust that guidance system. So I can sit here and I can talk to you about spiritual growth and I can say things that might sound good, but ultimately this is all about discernment and self-trust. Knowing that actually the connection to yourself is the most important thing, and learning to trust that and to kind of navigate when we're kind of getting stuck, navigate the noise of the mind, to connect to a deeper intuition, to connect to the heart, connect to the emotions, and to learn the kind of emotional messaging system. But ultimately to trust that essence of who you are and to remain connected and true to it, and always kind of choosing that over choosing the probably easier, more reactive, ego-based thought or whatever. Has anyone got any questions? Because I could talk for an extended period of time. I wonder if anyone has any questions either about what I've shared or in general. I'll leave just for a few seconds. I'll kind of sit still just for a few moments. Kenzo's asked if I'd love to hear your thoughts on day-to-day practical examples of how to apply awareness, e.g. meditation, mindfulness techniques, etc. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm a meditator. So I really believe in the almost essential nature of meditation. Because what we're doing when we meditate, I like the metaphor of that being a kind of classroom almost. Like this is a direct practice where we close our eyes, so we disconnect from the external, and we refine our concentration. It's this refining of concentration that allows us to see the surfacing of mind and to basically connect to the patterns of thought and to boost awareness through that practice. It's not the be all and end all of self-awareness, but it's almost like an acute spell where we're learning to develop our practice and our technique. Mindfulness is also, this is something that I try and apply, and I can kind of go through stages where I'm being more mindful and slipping up. But I find that when you combine even just the intention to have, so Gurdjieff, who was a great teacher who taught the fourth way, he talks of double pointed or divided attention. It's having this kind of intention to always, in any moment that we're in, not only are we focusing on the external, we're focusing on ourselves. So we're kind of seeing how we're relating to the world as we're in it. Now, that might just be through the practice of meditation, through increasing awareness, that we are becoming sharper in our focus, sharper in our level of introspection, and noticing things about ourselves that we might have been resisting, we might not have been aware of before. We then notice certain kind of red flags or green flags of, okay, in this situation, and really we're talking about emotions here a lot of the time. We're looking at what directs me back to myself, what directs me to myself when there's something going on that I have to look at. And this is where we're breaching into understanding and having faith in a worldview that is like where consciousness isn't just limited to the individual. And we're all here for this topic, and I feel there's, you know, receptivity or experience of that. But it's looking at these are pointers. What pointers are there to maybe kind of just turn up the dial, to maybe go, okay, right, I'm feeling angry. I'm caught up. I'm on autopilot. I'm feeling angry. Now I'm noticing that anger is teaching me something. I'll pause. I'll sit. And mindfulness is just meditation in the moment. It's meditation with our eyes open. So we're looking at, okay, I've been made aware of a certain process that I'm going through right now. Is reflected in my external. Can I bring this meditation? Can I bring the meditative technique of being aware without judgment? So kind of being as expansive as we can in our awareness, and then see if in the moment we can catch ourselves. Now, one thing that I will say is a lot of the time, as awareness increases, we are actually, I like a lot of my work in the beginning was retrospective. So I would just be like, the fuck happened then, Ricky? Like, what was that? And then I'll kind of use memory. I'll use the memory, and you know, memory, it's not just a picture, right? Memory is an embodied recollection. And I say that as it's actually in our bodies, but also we remember how we feel, we remember the smells. It's like an immersive experience, not always, but it can be. It's almost like we're entering that part of our lives again. And then this is the curious thing. This is the curious thing. We can be retrospective and then find out more information. And I spoke of encoding at the earlier on, and it's almost like even memories are encoded with the right information that leads us back to ourselves. So it might be that we reflect and go, yeah, do you know what? When I was having that conversation, there was a thought that was present. There was a belief, this person's wronged me in some way, right? So we're like, oh shit, okay, I have this thought, this belief. Generally, through this process of growing self-awareness, we're looking at patterns. So if there's a pattern of behavior, this is a huge area of exploration. That's a sign that there's a kind of deeper core belief or complex. But we're looking at least retrospectively looking at the times where there's been a notable incident. So where something's happened and we're like, I can't put my finger on it. I felt really like off. It didn't feel authentic. Why is it that in these situations that I do X, Y, Z, maybe journaling, kind of going through it? And then what happens is eventually in the moment, right? And this is the thing, again, with the mystery and the intelligence of life and the unfolding of consciousness, we will be presented with a similar situation again. And it's almost like, all right, this time, I know what I did last time that I would like to change. And now I've got the opportunity in the moment because I've picked up on the same cues from my environment, from my emotions, from, you know, whatever kind of pattern there is. And now I know there's work to be done. Does that, are you satisfied with? Yeah, sweet, awesome. Oh, I also saw your other question, Kenzo. That's awesome. Yeah. So the question is, and once you notice, once you have that awareness, does ethics come into play? How to develop that discernment? This question leads me to the idea of intelligence. What comes with the culture, what comes with this idea that essentially we are just ego, that we are just intellect, which leads back pretty much from where we are today to around the 17th century and the age of enlightenment in the West, and the kind of reason and logic becoming the key area of human kind of perfection or human capability. We've disconnected from collectively different forms of intelligence. We don't really view intuition with much respect. Like if you look at it in a lot of science, a lot of people will look at one type of intuition, which is intuition through building skills or kind of being immersed in a certain environment. So we just quickly respond in a skillful way. But there's a deeper level of intuition that is intelligent and it's outside of mind. Now we can keep going. We can say like the kind of smaller the intelligence or the more local the intelligence, the less complex it is. So the ego is like this, right? The heart kind of intelligence expands and expands and expands, and it's kind of arbitrary to put it in that way, but the intelligence of the intellect is the kind of most narrow form of intelligence. The reason I'm talking about this is that we have spiritual intelligence as well as intellectual intelligence. Now it could be, and I know many people that are not what you would say like a book smart. They're not academically smart, but they just seem to be imbued with wisdom, and they're not even aware that they are. They're just like saying stuff. You're like, you can kind of recite so much information and so much complexity of concepts, but actually the intelligence of the heart, the intelligence of the spirit, is another form of intelligence that is more vast than the ego, that is more vast than the intellect. Point being, and for whatever reason encoding is coming up at the moment, inherently, and when I say this is what I believe to be true. You can just check in with yourself when I say this. I believe that inherently, on the deepest level of heart, on the deepest level of our being, we have values, like spiritual values instilled, and that these are actually essential components and qualities of cosmic consciousness, of God, of the universe, however we want to describe it. And their love and their compassion and their peace and their harmony and their stillness and all of these qualities. So I would say one of the best ways to discern is actually to almost connect to the heart, and to always, it sounds kind of oversimplistic, but always turn towards love. In any situation, if you can turn towards love, you're moving in the right direction. Love is expansive. Love accommodates. Love cares for everyone and every being. Love cares for the planet. So if we can discern and just initially kind of use love as that North Star, that's going to lead us in the direction of ethical behavior and ethical way of relating with the world. Thank you for those questions. So another question. Any tips for someone where the voice of ego is constantly engaged in self-sabotage, along with the mind flooding with intrusive thoughts, obsessions? For example, if I do a good act, and it cuts off, oh, right, is that you are just being fake? Yeah. Even the truest, most authentic act can be hijacked by the ego in less than a second. Even the most authentic, heartfelt, expansive act can be hijacked by the ego in less than a second. And what I mean by that is, I interviewed Stephen Bodier, who wrote Meditation for Dummies. And I use the word, I'm going to disagree with him. I don't even care. I'm on a roll. I'm going to disagree with Stephen. But I mentioned vigilance being important, right? On like the path. And he said it's more about relaxation rather than vigilance. And I do agree. And maybe it's because I'm highly strung that I'm like disagreeing on some level. Why I think vigilance is really important, at least for maybe in the earlier stages of development, or as we're still kind of trusting our discernment, like I believe that we do get to a point where we can kind of relax in. I talk of like choosing love, and I talk of discernment. We can relax into that when we've developed it. But the vigilance really comes from noticing when we conceptualize, because it's not that in any given moment, it's not the ego even itself is not rigid, right? The ego is not rigid. It actually adapts. And this is what spiritual ego is, right? We start a spiritual practice and we meditate. And it could even be that, you know, you're in a meditation, you're connecting to the truest, most authentic expression of yourself. And then you might even have a thought like, I am God, right? You're like, wow, like I'm having these visions. My psychic, like my third eye's open and I'm having these psychic abilities. What we're doing is conceptualizing from an experience. So the vigilance comes in really just being radically self-honest. Like, the name, I wasn't being rude. The example you give, I think, is great, because when we reflect, we can really look at, and going back to this idea of memory and like encoding and being able to learn from it, we can go like, well, was I being fake in that situation? Now, when we work with the ego, we're constantly facing like barrier after barrier. And you know, our truest expression, like the self with a capital S, is always there. And it is the purest part of us, but there's just so much in the way that we have to work with, right? So we have to understand through the path of spiritual growth, more so than anything, the things that hold us back. And a lack of self-honesty is a huge part of that. So we could look and you know, I would say the majority of people kind of live in self-deceit. And I don't mean that to a degree, like in all areas of life, but self-deceit can just be as simple as, do you know what, I was acting inauthentically. Honesty works in a multitude of ways, and we have to be honest with ourselves first and foremost. We can't be honest with other people if we're not honest with ourselves. Again, there are other intelligences in play. There are intelligences that kind of alert us to when we are being fake, when we're not being authentic. It's also felt a lot of the time. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Oh, wait, hang on. Let me. You talk, yeah. So part of this question is self-sabotage. And what we want to look at as well, and those of you familiar with Eckhart Tolle will know that he talks of the pain body. Carl Jung talks about complexes of the psyche. Patanjali talks about samskaras, which are imprints that stay with us. When engaging in self-sabotage behavior, we're going to notice that we're kind of fully with the self-sabotaging behavior. We're going to feel quite constricted. There's going to be a lot of probably difficult emotion. It could even be that you just feel disconnected from yourself. It could be that you're kind of really not engaged with what you're saying, or you feel elevated in a certain way and you kind of feel like you've lost your hold or your control. In terms of a tip for self-sabotage, I would say start with self-compassion, referring back to this idea of looking at patterns. What you want to do is notice when you're in a situation, you begin to self-sabotage, and then to kind of connect to that, and you can break that cycle. And that's the beauty of awareness. You can break the cycle. But it's understanding that like a lot of self-sabotaging behaviors are very embodied, and it's kind of linked to trauma in the body. So it's likely that there'll be a lot of constriction. You do also mention thoughts and obsessions, and self-sabotage as well can obviously be internal. It can be certain thinking processes. You know, I would go as far to say that a lot of people, myself included, can self-harm with thought, right? This isn't necessarily something I used to do a lot more, and it doesn't really happen now, but we can self-harm with thought. And that can just be like indulging in like a scenario about how people feel about you, right? Like if you just sat there and you're kind of on your own, and you then just start having like images around, oh, these people don't like me, those people don't, that's a form of self-harm. When you look at ahimsa, non-violence, as like a metaphysical practice, that is a form of self-harm. So we're looking in these situations to break the chain with, again, compassion. So vigilance and compassion. When thoughts are particularly intrusive, that's the time to really be with them as best you can and be patient with the process, right? So what you resist persists, but the more that we create resistance to certain thoughts, to certain complexes, the more that we actually keep them in place. So that's a time again to really tune into compassion and acceptance. I'm aware we're kind of coming up to the hour, and yeah, I really appreciate, I really appreciate you turning up. I really appreciate you turning up and asking questions and engaging. And I hope it's been useful. I hope there's been insight contained. And as a takeaway, I really, I want to capture that this is an ongoing process, and we're looking to make small incremental steps, right? When we're working with the ego, we're looking to make incremental steps as not only we understand about ourselves, but we become less reactive. We connect to our kind of spiritual essence more. We're doing the work over time. We also live in a culture that wants immediate results. And it's not that the immediate results cannot be connected to, in the present, it is already there always. But for most people, the reality is there's a lot of difficult stuff to work with, right? Like a lot of shadow work and a lot of different areas of growth. So yeah, I would like to leave you with that kind of note to be kind and to be patient with yourselves, to look at this as a long game. We're always growing, we're always evolving, and it is a process over time. I know that, after all these words, the truth of who we are is beyond all language, and it kind of presents itself in stillness. It presents itself in silence. So I would love for you all to set the intention to kind of drown out, spend some time in your day, in your evening, in the morning, to just drown out some of the outside noise and just connect to whatever surfaces on the inner world. So thank you so much for joining this talk.